Long before Jacob stepped across the river to meet the brother he once deceived, there was a moment he never spoke about again. A stretch of night where the world around him fell silent, and every sound from the trees, every shift in the darkness, seemed to press against him. Most people remember the reunion with Esau. Few paused to notice the hours Jacob spent alone right before it. Hours where he wasn't only preparing to face a man he feared, he was preparing to face the part of himself he had avoided for years. He had sent his family away. He had sent his possessions away. And for the first time in a long time, nothing stood between him and the choices that had shaped him. But something else happened on that riverbank. Something the text mentions with such a brief line that you almost miss it entirely. A figure steps into the quiet. No introduction, no warning, no explanation. And the question that has echoed across centuries is this: what actually happened in that darkness? And why does the writer describe the stranger in a way that makes you lean closer, as though the real weight of the moment sits beneath the surface of those few words? Jacob had walked through many regions, but the path back toward Canaan carried a weight the others never had. The year was somewhere in the early second millennium before our era, and the customs of the time gave immense power to family honor. A wounded brother was not just a personal issue. His anger could echo through generations. And Jacob knew this well. The ford of the Jabbok River stretched in front of him, a rough crossing, narrow but unpredictable, with stones slick from the flowing current. Behind him lay 20 years of decisions he could no longer avoid. He had built new life in Haran, gathered herds, wives, children. Yet this return forced him to confront the moment he had taken Esau's blessing and the last words he heard from his brother, words shaped by deep fury. Jacob stood on the bank, watching the water move as evening set in. He wasn't the boy who once grabbed his brother's heel. He wasn't the young man who ran across deserts carrying only fear and determination. But even now, older and heavier with responsibility, something in him tightened at the thought of what waited on the other side of this journey. He arranged his camp with practiced precision. Servants whispered as they moved livestock. Children clung to their mothers. The air carried a quiet tension, the kind that made every person in the camp understand that their safety depended entirely on Jacob's next steps. He separated the group, first one section, then another, a gesture common in ancient conflict. If one part of the family was attacked, the other might survive. It was a plan built out of caution, calculation, and a deep knowledge of how easily blood feuds escalated in his culture. He thought through every possibility, pacing along the shoreline, stopping only when a thought weighed heavily enough to make him pause in place. Each decision reflected more than strategy. It showed the tug-of-war happening inside him, between courage and hesitation, between leadership and regret. And as the final light faded, Jacob sent the last of his people ahead. There was a brief moment where he watched them vanish into the dimness across the stream, each footstep soft and hurried, until the camp noises grew faint. Now he stood alone. No servants, no family, no distractions to cushion his thoughts. The river's steady rush filled the silence, giving him too much time to consider Esau's possible reaction after all these years. In their world, a man returning after such a severe offense could be greeted with reconciliation or retribution. And Jacob had no guarantee which outcome waited for him. He moved along the bank, stopping every so often to look into the night, as though expecting something, anything to give him clarity. His hand traced the fabric of his cloak. His shoulders tightened. He replayed old memories he had managed to push aside while in a foreign land. The more the night settled, the more the weight around him felt concentrated, focused entirely on the moment ahead. He wasn't simply planning for Esau. He was reckoning with a history he had outrun for 2 decades. The river kept flowing. The shadows held their silence. And Jacob remained on the edge of both, caught between what he had been and what he was about to become. Jacob motioned for his family to cross first. One by one, they stepped into the shallows, the torchlight flickering across their faces as they moved toward the other side. The children clung to their mothers. The servants carried small bundles of supplies, each footstep uncertain on the wet stones. Jacob stood at the edge, watching every movement. He said nothing, but the silence around him carried a heaviness that words could never match. There was something symbolic in the moment. This man who once held tightly to whatever gave him an advantage was now releasing everything he loved into the distance. Nothing shielded him now. No group to hide behind. No distraction to ease the weight of returning home. He waited until the final figure disappeared beyond the shadows. Only then did he let out a slow breath, the kind that escapes when a man realizes the path ahead must be walked alone. Night deepened around him. The river murmured steadily, its surface catching faint glimmers of moonlight. Reed stems shifted with every breeze, brushing softly against one another like quiet whispers. Jacob remained at the crossing, motionless at first. The solitude pressed close. With no one to witness his thoughts, the memories he had pushed aside for 20 years began to gather, in fragments at first, then in full scenes he could not outrun. The bargain he made for a bowl of stew. The deception that took a blessing meant for another. The look on Esau's face when he learned what had been done. Jacob's breaths grew uneven. He walked a few steps, then stopped, walked again, then froze as though struck by another wave of recollection. The calm around him gave no comfort. Instead, it sharpened every feeling inside him. Fear of Esau's reaction, regret for the choices that shaped his life, worry for the family he had just sent ahead. The darkness was no longer just the absence of light. It was a space where nothing shielded him from his own mind. And then, without a sound announcing his arrival, a figure stood near him. The scriptures make no effort to dramatize this moment. No storm, no blinding flash, no warning. The figure is simply there, sudden, still, close enough that Jacob could sense the presence before fully seeing it. Jacob turned sharply. There was only a breath's worth of time to register confusion before the stranger reached out, catching him with a force that felt both human and beyond human at the same time. Jacob stumbled. Instinct took over. His hands shot out to brace himself. The riverbank's soil shifted under his feet. A grip tightened around him, firm, unyielding. The confrontation had no words at first, just the raw shock of being seized in the darkness. And then the struggle began. Jacob fought with the intensity of a man who had been cornered by every unfinished chapter of his life. His opponent met every effort with precise strength, never overpowering him instantly, yet never yielding ground. They crashed against the earth, rolled through the reeds, staggered near the waterline. Jacob's breath came in rough bursts. Sweat and dust clung to his skin. He tried to wrench free, to gain leverage, to understand who or what he was facing. But every time he pushed forward, the stranger responded with equal resolve. Slow moments stretched out as the struggle continued. Jacob's shoulder pressed against the soil, his fingers gripping the earth for balance. His face tightened, not only from the physical strain, but from the confusion rising inside him. Who confronts a man like this in the dead of night? Why here? Why now? And then something deeper settled into Jacob's awareness. The strength he was fighting against did not feel ordinary. There was a steadiness to it, a restraint that made the encounter feel purposeful rather than chaotic. At some point, Jacob understood this was no random attack, and the opponent before him was unlike any he had faced. The hours passed, and the horizon began to shift. A faint gray light gathered far in the east, brushing the outline of the hills. Jacob's limbs trembled from exertion. Every muscle felt stretched to its limit. Yet he tightened his grip around the figure as though letting go meant losing something he could never regain. The stranger shifted again, and in a calm voice, steady, direct, spoke words that broke through the struggle. "Let me go for the day breaks." Jacob held on with the strength of a man who had reached the end of every excuse, every escape, every version of himself he could no longer maintain. His voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the depth of his desperation. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." That moment hung between them, the fading night, the rising light, and a man who refused to release the very presence that had confronted him. It was the point where fear, regret, and hope collided in one final plea, and the air around them seemed to still, waiting for what would come next. As the struggle reached its peak and the sky brightened, something remarkable came into focus. Jacob had entered the night expecting to face Esau. Instead, he found himself face to face with the presence he had been edging away from for most of his life. This was not an enemy trying to overwhelm him. This was not a thief attempting to steal from him. This was not a stranger passing through the region. Jacob was wrestling the one he had prayed to, bargained with, spoken about, yet never truly surrendered to. In that moment, the confrontation was no longer physical alone. It reached into the heart of everything Jacob had built. His cleverness, his instinct to control outcomes, his habit of shaping his future through his own hands even when it meant wounding others. For years he had survived by strategy. He won blessings through planning. He escaped danger by fleeing. Every chapter of his life carried the mark of a man who relied on his own method of navigating conflict. And now, on this riverbank, God pressed against that very pattern. The touch to Jacob's hip came suddenly, not out of anger, not to overpower him in rage, but with a precision that revealed intention. Jacob's strength had carried him through many journeys, yet the moment his hip was struck, he realized how fragile that strength truly was. He clung tighter. The limp that followed was not a punishment. It was a reminder that the transformation happening within him required letting go of the identity he had carried from childhood, a name tied to grasping, securing, outmaneuvering, surviving by any means possible. And then came a question so simple, so direct, that it cut deeper than the physical pain he felt. What is your name? God did not ask because he lacked information. He asked because Jacob needed to speak the truth about who he had been. In their culture, a name was not just a label. It reflected character, reputation, personal history. By saying his name, Jacob admitted the story he had lived, every choice wrapped inside it. The moment he said it, the struggle shifted. Confession opened the way for transformation. Jacob had spent a lifetime depending on his ability to gain advantage, but now he stood, or rather clung, on the edge of a new identity shaped not by cleverness, but by encounter. He had relied on his strength. So God touched the very place that carried that strength. He had relied on his own strategy. So God brought him to a moment where strategy meant nothing. He had carried guilt, fear, and old wounds. So God met him in the darkness where those buried things had nowhere left to hide. Transformation often comes to the places we trust the most, not to break us beyond repair, but to rebuild us with truth we could never reach on our own. Moments after the struggle ended, the story opens into layers many readers pass over quickly. Details that carry weight once you understand the world Jacob lived in. The first comes from his name itself. In Hebrew, Yaakov is tied to the idea of grasping the heel, taking advantage, reaching for something not freely given. It reflects the moment he entered the world holding onto Esau's heel and the decisions that followed him into adulthood. His very name carried a history of tension, conflict, and striving. So when God asked, "What is your name?" the question pierced more deeply than a simple request for identity. Jacob was being asked to acknowledge the entire pattern of his life, the traits that both protected him and wounded others. Speaking his name aloud was a form of confession. But another detail deepens this scene even further. Jacob's crossing of the Jabbok at night was extremely dangerous in the ancient Near East. River fords were unpredictable. Stones shifted. Animals sometimes came to drink. Night crossings were avoided unless a situation was urgent. The fact that Jacob sent his family across in darkness shows how troubled he was, how determined he felt to prepare for whatever might come with Esau. His loneliness by the river wasn't just emotional. It placed him in physical risk long before the struggle began. Then comes the significance of names in covenant culture. To ask for someone's name was to ask for access to their identity, their reputation, their story. In formal agreements between tribes, the exchange of names was a step toward trust, or in some cases, surrender. So when God asked Jacob his name, and then refused to give his own in response, the moment carried a profound imbalance. Jacob was being reshaped, yet God remained beyond full comprehension. There's more. After the confrontation ended, Jacob did something striking. He named the place Peniel, the face of God. Not a title chosen lightly, not a casual expression. It was his way of acknowledging that the one he wrestled with was no ordinary visitor. In a culture where names marked encounters, Jacob was declaring that he had come as close to the divine presence as any man could survive. Some scholars point out that this may be the only recorded instance in Scripture where a human physically wrestles with God. Not a dream, not a symbolic vision, a physical struggle etched into the soil of a real riverbank. These insights shift the entire weight of the story. A man named for grasping is confronted in the very act of grasping. A man known for outmaneuvering others finds himself held in a contest he cannot control. A man who crossed a river in fear given new name to the place where he was transformed. Every part of the scene, from the setting to the questions asked, carries meaning far deeper than the brief lines of text reveal. There comes a night in every person's life that arrives without permission, a night that doesn't warn you it's coming. It doesn't shout. It doesn't rush. It just settles over you, the way a heavy cloud settles over a quiet landscape, turning familiar shapes into unfamiliar outlines. It's the kind of night where the world around you seems to step back and hold its breath. Phones grow silent. The noise of the day fades. Rooms feel larger than usual. Thoughts stretch out in ways they never do when the sun is up. And suddenly, without planning it, without rehearsing it, you find yourself facing the one thing you've been putting off for years. Sometimes it's a truth you've avoided. Sometimes it's a memory you've buried. Sometimes it's a question you've refused to answer because you already know what the answer demands. These are the nights when a person realizes something honest. Running only works until the moment you stop. And when you stop, truly stop, you feel the weight of everything you've outrun finally catching up. Jacob's night by the river wasn't written for ancient history alone. It stands there like a mirror each generation has to look into. Because sooner or later, every human being reaches a point where the darkness outside feels calm, but the tension inside refuses to settle. You can't sleep. You can't turn away. You can't pretend anymore. That's when the real wrestling begins. That's when the questions arrive without knocking. That's when the past steps forward and demands to be acknowledged. This is where Jacob's story becomes our story. Jacob faced the uncertainty of the next morning. Many viewers face the exact same kind of tension, not with a brother's army, but with decisions that could reshape their lives. Fear has a way of pushing people into corners they never planned to stand in. Jacob's night shows that fear often becomes the stage where transformation begins. Jacob lived under a name that carried weight, a name tied to his flaws. Many viewers carry labels placed on them by upbringing, mistakes, failure, or people who spoke carelessly. Before God gives Jacob a new future, he confronts the identity Jacob accepted long ago. Jacob wasn't running from Esau alone. He was running from the choices that shaped him. Today, countless people walk through life with old missteps following them like shadows. This story shows that facing the past is the doorway to a new path. Jacob prayed for help, but no voice answered him before the encounter. Silence often feels like emptiness, yet the story shows that silence can be the space where God prepares the next chapter. Change rarely feels comfortable. Jacob left one life, crossed a river, and braced for another. That shift between where you've been and where you're going is exactly where many viewers stand. Jacob wasn't just protecting his family. He was stepping toward a destiny larger than himself. Many people sense a calling, yet hesitate because the road toward it feels uncertain. What have you been running from? Everyone carries something they prefer to avoid until it stands in front of them. What name have you been carrying that God wants to change? Is it failure? Is it guilt? Is it shame? Is it a label someone else placed on you years ago? What weakness has become the place where God is shaping you? Jacob walked with a limp, Yet that limp became the proof of his transformation. Sometimes the very area we see as weakness becomes the place where God reshapes our character. There are nights in a person's life when the road ahead feels thin, almost fragile, as though the next step might carry more weight than the ones before it. These are the nights when a person looks at things they've avoided and realizes the choice isn't between courage and fear, but between facing the truth or continuing to run from it. Jacob entered such a night alone. No torchlight, no companionship, just the steady sound of distant water and the awareness that morning would demand an answer from him, whether he was ready or not. He thought he was preparing to face Esau. What he didn't know was that he was about to face himself. That's the part of Jacob's story that often gets overlooked. The way the night around him seemed to quiet every distraction until the only thing left was the weight of who he had become. And when the struggle started, it wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was the kind of struggle that comes from years of carrying more than a human heart was designed to hold. By the time the sky began to lighten, Jacob realized something astonishing. The person he feared meeting at sunrise wasn't the true challenge. The real challenge was stepping out of that night as someone changed, someone honest, someone who was finally ready to stop relying on what had carried him in the past. He stepped into the darkness with fear. He stepped out with a new identity, and that limp, the mark left on him, wasn't there to shame him or weaken him. It stood as a quiet reminder that grace can reshape a person more deeply than strength ever could. Jacob didn't receive relief from his fear. Instead, God shaped the man who was carrying it. The night didn't erase the danger. The sunrise didn't remove the uncertainty. But Jacob emerged different, and that change was the real blessing. Some blessings don't arrive through comfort. Some don't arrive through planning. Some don't arrive through the paths we prepare for ourselves. Some blessings appear when a person refuses to let go. Which Bible character should we explore next? Have you ever felt like you were wrestling with God the way Jacob did here? What part of Jacob's transformation touched you the most?